Hello and welcome to another Laravel video. Today we are going to talk about events and listeners. So events and listeners are basically just pieces of code that react to each other. And I think the best example to understand this is from JavaScript. If we open our app.js just for practice, we're not going to do anything here. We have add event listener, and this event listener would take the event we want to listen to, for example, a click. We are telling our app to listen to a click event on a certain button or a form or something like that, and then react to that event using this listener. So Laravel events and listeners are basically the same thing. We can have an event and multiple listeners would listen to that event and run different tasks. So let's just see this in action. So we want to start with our event and we want to create one. And in order to create an event, we can use a PHP artisan command. So let's go to our terminal and run PHP artisan make event. Now we could either pass in the name here and then press enter, or we could just press enter without passing the name, and Laravel would give us a prompt to enter the name of this event. And I want to call it user subscribed. Press enter. Now we have a new folder under our app directory, which is called events. So if we open that event we just created, you notice we have a bunch of classes and traits and interfaces imported for us, but we really don't need any of this. So I want to keep this very simple. I'm going to get rid of this broadcast function at the bottom and just stay with the construct function, which is our constructor. We can even delete these imports that we don't use, so we have a clean event. So we know that this construct function is where we can pass in parameters so we can then use them in our code. But for now, I just want to die and dump and say event called. Now, in order to call this event, we have an event helper function. And if we go to our auth controller, in the previous videos, when we registered, we implemented the email verification system. And for that, we used an event. So this registered event is a built-in event, and we invoked that or called it using this event helper function. Now let's do the same thing for our event. So I'm going to open post controller and go to the index method, basically our home page, and I'm going to call our event using event helper function, which would look for the event. I want to say new user subscribed. So we need to import it and then provide the parentheses. So if we had any parameters in our construct function, we would pass it inside these parentheses. All right, so let's see if this works. If we go to our application, to the home page, we get that die and dump that says event called. So that is the easiest example we can have. And of course, you can have any code here. You can have even parameters. Let's say we have a public string name and I want to just use it in this die and dump. So I just want to say event called and then concatenate the name and go back to our post controller. Now our user subscribed is expecting a name. So let's just pass in Mike and refresh our page. We get event called and then the name we passed into our event. But of course, this is not what we want to do with events. We want to have listeners to listen to this event and they do different tasks. For example, you have different departments, they want to send emails or they want to handle purchases or update a certain table in your database and so on. So what I'm going to do, delete this die and dump and just replace it with a comment and then create our first listener. So let's go back to our terminal and run PHP artisan make listener. Now again, we could pass in the name or we can just press enter. So let's name our listener. I want to call it send a subscriber email and press enter. Now this time Laravel is asking us if this listener has an event. Now we could choose user subscribed event here or we could leave it empty. So I'm going to choose our user subscribed because our listener want to listen to that user subscribed event. So now we have a new folder called listeners under app. So let's open that one and the document we just created. And in this listener class, we have two functions. One is our construct function and the other one is the handle, which is the one we want to use. So this function would be called when our event is invoked. And you notice as a parameter in this function, we have our user subscribed event already included here. And that's because in our terminal, we said we want these two to be linked. And we can also clean up just like the event class. So we don't need any of this. And we don't need the construct function too, but I'm going to leave it and stay with handle. Now, just like our event class, I'm going to die and dump. And this time I want to say listener called. So we have our event, which has just a constructor, and we have our listener, which is listening to that user subscribed event, and then we are calling our event on our homepage. message. So we don't need to change anything here. Let's go back to our website and just refresh the site. We get listener called. So just by calling our event, this listener was invoked. And that is basically how they work. Now, let's say we want to grab this name which we are passing into our event, and in our listener we are already accepting that event as a parameter, so we can access that event's public properties. Again, I want to say listener called and then concatenate that event and whatever property we want to access. So in this case we called this property name, and that's why I'm chaining name to this event. Back to our website, give it a refresh, we see that name. Now let's go back to our register form, and I want to add a checkbox here that says subscribe to our newsletter. And if the user selects that, we want to send an email to them. And I've already have my email set up using Mailtrap. Let's just start by going to register blade template. And at the very bottom before the button, I'm just going to add a div, and I will have an input of type checkbox with the name subscribe and a label for that input field and with the text subscribe to our newsletter. And this is our checkbox. So if I check this, I want to send an email to the user when they register. All right, so let's close this one. Then go to our post controller, delete this event and close this one too. Go to our auth controller, and in the register function, maybe right after we send email verification, we can invoke our event. So first, I want to check if the request object has a subscribe property. Then we want to call our event and send the email. So first, let's prepare our event and listener. Back to our event, instead of accepting a string, I want to say that I am expecting a user. So we need to import our user model up here, and then we need to give it a name. So let's call it user. And then in our listener, instead of this die and dump, I want to send an email. So we can use the mail facade and use a raw method because I don't want to create views and mailable class for it. I want to keep it simple. So I just want to send a text mail. And I want to say thank you for subscribing to our newsletter. That is the first argument on this raw method. The second argument is a callback function. And in this callback function, we need to accept a message, and then we can include the properties of our email. For example, I want to send this message to the user. Let's just hard code it now. We could also have maybe a subject. I want to say thank you, and we can have as many fields as we want. For example, CC or replying to and attachments and so on. Anyway, now we want to send this email to the user that we are getting from our event. So we need to use the event here and then user, and we know we have an email property on this user. But you notice we are getting an error because we don't have access to this event. And that is because this event inside this function, it's out of scope. So we don't have access to this event, which is outside of this function. But we can easily fix that by using the event. Just like that, we are telling this function to use this event, which is available on the parent function. All right, so now our event expecting a user instance. So let's go to our auth controller, and in this if statement, I want to use the event helper function and say new user subscribed, which is now looking for a user. So up here we are creating one. Let's just pass it down here and end the statement, and let's try this out. So we want to create a user here, and I'm going to check this checkbox, press register. We have to wait a while since we are sending 2 emails now, and we should have 2 emails in our mail trap service. And there we go. We have verification email that we did in the previous videos. And also we have this thank you email, which is sent through our listeners. So that's basically how events and listeners work. We create our event and then our listeners that would listen to that event and perform certain tasks. Now to have another example, I want to create a second listener that would listen to the same event. So let's go back to our terminal, and I'm going to make a listener, but this time I want to just provide the name in this command, and I want to call it update subscribers table. Press enter. We have a new listener class. Let's go back to our project, open this new document, and you notice down here in the handle function, we don't have our user subscribed. So we just have a generic object, but we can easily fix that by passing user subscribe event down here. So it is of course imported, and we can also delete these 2 imports. So now it looks the same as the other listener we have. Now what I want to do here with this listener is to update a table which we don't have at the moment, because with this setup that I have, there is no way that I can tell this user is subscribed to our newsletter. Now, of course, we could add a column to the users table and say whether they are subscribed or not, but this is just for practice. So I'm going to create a migration file for subscribers table. So let's go back to terminal, and I'm going to make a migration and call it create underscore subscribers underscore table. All right, let's go back to our project and open that migration file. And then in this up method, where we create our table, we want to add maybe just one column. So I want to have a column of type string, and the name of the column should be email. So now this is set up. We want to run our migration to create this table. So back to our terminal, let's say PHP artisan migrate, and this will create a subscribers table for us. And if we check our database, we have a subscribers table. So we can close this migration file, and back to our update subscribers table listener, we want to add the user's email to that table. Now, since we don't have a model for this, I'm just going to use the DB facade, make sure it is imported up here, then use the function insert, which is looking for a query, and that is a MySQL query. So I want to say insert into the name of the table, subscribers, and the column we want to use is email, and the values for this, I'm going to use a question mark as a placeholder. As a second argument in this insert function, we can pass an array with the values that our statement needs. So we need an email, and we can grab it from event, then user, then email. So this is our second listener that is listening to the user subscribed event. So now we have two listeners and one event, and we are calling that event when the user registers. So let's see if this works. I'm going to go back to our project and log out, go to register again, and create a new user, and also subscribe, press register, and when that is done, we should have two emails. There we go. And if we go back to MySQL and grab everything from our subscribers table, we have one entry, that is the user we just created. And that's all about events and listeners. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you at the next one.